believe it or not, I have a lot of malpractice stories, my own and my loved ones. And I'm going through one right now. And I went to the emergency room. And I was stuttering. I had pins and needles in my arms and my legs. And I was quickly losing function of both. And I knew what it felt like because this was the third time this had happened to me in my life. It hits you so fast, and it's terrifying. So I knew that it was the medication, because it was the only thing that had changed between the day before and my current situation. And I thought I was having an allergic reaction. I didn't know what was wrong. I just knew it was the drugs. It was always the drugs. So I lurched for my phone because your hands start shaking so bad and you can't function. You lose function so fast. You lose the ability to start speaking. And you start convulsing. And so my parents just happened to be in the area. And they were going to stop by later. And I called my mom, and I actually have the recording of the call that I made to my mother. And I got out in a rush that I'm having an allergic reaction. You need to take me to the emergency room immediately. And I just had that deja vu feeling. And so she stayed on the phone with me, and I got worse real fast. And anxiety makes it worse. And obviously I was upset. You're basically having seizures. And the stutter gets worse. So our parents, they got me in the car, and, I'm convulsing, and I can't really speak. And I remember every traumatic second of it. And by the time they got me to the ER, I was in a wheelchair, and my body was jerking side to side. I was hyperventilating, or I was having a hard time breathing. My body was going absolutely haywire. And we brought the pills that I had just filled the day before with us. And at the time we thought that it was the Cipro because it has a black box warning label saying that it could cause seizures. It's a dangerous medication. And, they're snapping at me and they're telling me to answer them, and I couldn't function. I was completely aware the entire time, but I couldn't function. And I carry all my medication with me everywhere I go for emergency purposes. And I have a lot of medication. So I always, show my new medications or my over-the-counter medications, all my medications, to anybody. I can hand them the pills. I know a lot about medication and medical subjects. I studied medical transcription, and I was a medical transcriptionist for a few years. And I've spelled the drugs for the doctors and nurses. But obviously, I wasn't having an easy time talking. I still have trouble sometimes. 6 months later. So all day I was in the ER, and I would have these episodes, and I would have these seizures, and they were painful and they were terrifying. My eyes would start to blink and they'd roll around in my head, and then I did this thing where my eyes rolled in the back of my head and I would just drop backwards like I'd passed out, but I wasn't unconscious. And I heard my parents talking to the doctors out in the hallway. They had the door open. And they said, what's going on with her? These aren't normal seizures. Does she have a mental history? And suddenly they weren't talking about an allergic reaction more. Now they're talking about, mental problems. And my medications that I take and my psych history and things like that. And I heard them, going through my purse and looking at the pills and, as I said, this is the third time this has happened to me. So one time I was accused of ODing. And I kept saying, well, I couldn't say at the time because I couldn't speak or move. But I said, after the fact, or if anybody that would listen to me, count the pills. There's only 2 missing. Count the pills. I didn't OD. I didn't do this. And nobody believed me, and they treated me like I was a junkie. So they started talking about how these weren't normal seizures and they were pseudo seizures. I didn't know what pseudo seizures were at the time, so it sounds like fake seizures. And that really upset me. My dad came in and said, Lisa, they think you're faking, because apparently that's what he thought as well. And it scared me so bad, because the first time that this happened to me was in 2003. And I was given, I've had traumatic losses of loved ones, and a lot of things happened to me. So I was in half-day program, and they gave me a bunch of different medications, psych medications and anxiety medications, and I was already on all kinds of different medications. And so my grandma, I knew had had a stroke, and it terrified me. It scared me really bad. And I started stuttering and hyperventilating, and I'd never done that before. Never. And I've lost 2 fiancés. They died when I was 21 and I was 23. And I never did that. And so my mom wanted me to go to the doctor, and we couldn't see my regular doctor, so we ended up seeing some resident. And I was in the office, in the exam room, and stuttering and scared, and he was asking me all these questions. It was very confusing, and I wasn't processing things, and I was getting more upset because he was asking me, things like, am I suicidal, or am I upset, or am I depressed, or am I going to hurt myself, or am I going to do this, or am I going to do that? And I didn't understand what was going on because I was stuttering, and that's why I went in there. And I never hyperventilated before, and that's why I was in there. And I said, I have to go home. I have to go home. Because I have degrees in fine and professional arts and animation. And I actually was blessed to be working on a full-length feature film from home for a studio in Canada. And I needed to go home and work. And the next thing I know, I'm in this wheelchair and they're wheeling me somewhere. And they're saying, I can't leave. I have to stay. So I'm terrified, and I'm like, how can you do that? And of course I'm stuttering, so I can hardly speak. My parents are upset, and they're wondering where are you taking our daughter? And so I guess I started convulsing. The more upset you get, the more you start having worse symptoms. And I just remember being in a hospital bed and being in so much pain and so scared and having these seizures, these convulsions, these episodes, whatever you want to call them. And they basically said, you have to sign this consent form or we can't treat you. Because I was in so much pain and I was so scared and I didn't know what was happening. So I signed it. And I was in the mental ward. And I couldn't get out. And the psychiatrist that had treated me in the half-day program that I had recently graduated from a few months before, he was a horrible person. And, he said, this is what you get for not following up with therapy. It wasn't mandatory, it was voluntary. Basically a threat. I got more threats when I was in there. I was told that if I behaved, because all I was doing was trying to figure out why I was there and why they wouldn't let me out. And so I was a difficult patient to them. So they said, if you behave, you can stay on this side of the hall. And you can have visitors and you can have TV. If you don't, you'll go to the other side. You won't have visitors. You won't have TV. And they do electroshock on you. I didn't even know they still did that. So they ended up keeping me for a few weeks. I didn't get to see anybody very often. I was drugged up so much, I didn't know what was real and what wasn't. I wasn't able to function. I was running into walls. I had bruises all over my body that we took pictures of. I almost fell in the bathroom because I was so dizzy and almost cracked my head open on the tile floor. It was so traumatic. It was just so traumatic. And my mom, she's like, what is wrong with my daughter? Why can't she function? She wasn't like this before. She wasn't running into walls and drooling on herself and scared out of her mind. What's going on with her? What are you doing to her? And they just kept making a fuss, and they kept making a fuss. And the nurses liked me, and so they started checking some things, and they saw that my doses had tripled from what they were to what they were giving me in the hospital. And they said that that's not right. There's no reason for that high of a dosage. It's not safe. So the more that we started protesting, they started to lower the dose, and I started to come around. And eventually they let me go, but the damage had been done. And I was devastated. I was traumatized. I was jello. I'd never been through anything like that before. But I just always thought that, the mental health profession and the psych wards and stuff were supposed to help you, and they weren't. They made me worse. They traumatized me. So when I was sitting in that ER this year, or last year in August, and we started talking about mental pseudo seizures, I was so scared. I was so scared. And they had given me a pill to kind of help me come around a little bit from what was going on. And I still wasn't okay, but I just wanted to get the hell out of that hospital before they locked me up, because it was the same damn hospital. So I did, and I went home, and I was dropped off, and I was left alone, and I was afraid I was going to have seizures, and I didn't know what was going to happen. I was terrified. I didn't feel good. I immediately stopped the medications. There were 3 of them. And slowly I started to come around. But I was never okay. I was never completely okay. Neurologically, something was wrong with me. And I could feel it in my head, and I could feel it in my body. My coordination was off. My speech was really bad at times, especially when I would get anxious or emotional. I kept saying there's something wrong with me, and no one would listen. So I went to my doctor, for a checkup from the ER visit. And I had an EEG. It was normal, so it's pseudo seizures. It's mental, you're crazy, that kind of thing, which scared me more, which made me think of what they did to me and locked me up. So I was like, nobody's gonna help me. I'm on my own. And, I'd have good days and bad days. I'd have what I called episodes. Anywhere from speech problems, either stuttering or slurring my words, or it was very slow to speak. Shortly after I got out of the hospital, I had what was called sensory overload, where anything to do with my senses would set me off. It was like being in a war zone in my head. I was sitting in the waiting room of a psychiatrist's office, and every little noise and every little movement, light, smells, all of it made me so anxious. It made me so sick. And I was shaking, and I would jerk. My body would just jerk. And I tried to keep it together. It was so hard. It was so hard. And I never experienced anything like it. I would get vertigo, and my head would get funny. I feel like I was going to pass out. And I have anxiety disorders that are disabling, and this anxiety was through the roof. Just horrible. And as with my psychiatrist in the past 5 years or so, the medication goes up, the medication goes down. You stop a medication, you start another medication. It was always side effects. It was always, adverse reactions. It was always, something that I couldn't tolerate. And I never linked any of this stuff with what was going on with me. Because I'd been seeing psychiatrists and therapists and everything since I was in college. Then after my love of my life and my fiance was sick and then died a week after my 21st birthday. My high school sweetheart. So I was on medications. And I just always thought that, we just had to find the right medications in order to treat me, to make me better. Because I had a whole list of mental health problems. Generalized anxiety, panic disorder, social anxiety, PTSD, agoraphobia, severe depression. Those are just the mental health diagnoses. The physical ones are far longer. And I never connected that up and down with the medications and the off and the on and all of the things that they did. I never connected it with what was going on with me this past 6 months and the other episodes that I've had. So, my psychiatrist bumped up my medication he doubled it, from 15 to 30. And within 2 weeks, my episodes got worse again. My speech got worse. My head was messed up. I was jerking all over the place. Sensory overload. My arms would go numb. My legs would go numb. Sometimes I couldn't even move. Like I was temporarily paralyzed. My arms would drop. I would lose coordination. I didn't know why, I just knew something was wrong with me. And I noticed that within an hour after I took my Remeron, that I would have an episode. I was standing in front of the microwave, cooking a frozen dinner. All of a sudden, I just started shaking, hyperventilating. I got really lightheaded. The smell made me instantly sick. I was terrified. It's like, oh no. It's happening again. And I thought this was an allergic reaction, so I immediately rushed in and took some Benadryl. and tried really, really hard to calm myself down because I didn't want to go back to the hospital because they never believed me and they were threatening. Or I felt that they were threatening to lock me up again because they just kept saying it was mental. It was mental. A month or so after I got back from the hospital and I was still having problems and I got my EEG back, and it was normal. He said there's something wrong with me, and I described it to the nurse on the phone, and he said I want to see a neurologist. And I've known this doctor since I was a kid. They called me back and they said, oh, it's just a panic attack. What's your psychiatrist's information? And I knew they'd made up their mind. And I knew I wasn't going to get any help. Because they were convinced that it was mental. So 3 weeks ago, I took my medicine again. And I had an even worse episode that lasted 12 hours. It was exhausting. It scared me so bad. I fought so hard not to go to the hospital. I didn't trust the hospital. I didn't trust the doctors. I didn't trust the ER. I didn't trust anything anymore. So I just suffered. And I shook. And I jerked. I couldn't breathe hardly. My tongue swelled up. My throat closed up somewhat, and I thought anaphylactic shock. I was a mess, and I realized it was the medication. It was the only thing that had changed. That's exactly what happened when I took it before. And it just dawned on me. And I was on the phone with my mom at the time. I was texting her, and I remember when it happened, and my hands started doing the shaking. I couldn't text anymore. It was like I was drunk texting. I didn't have any coordination. And I was shaking and I couldn't talk. And she's across the country in Florida. And I'm here. And so I was like, I'm not going to take the medication. So I frantically started looking up once the episode subsided. I frantically started looking up what was happening to me. And I was researching before then, my speech problems. My mom noticed them, and my therapist noticed them, and I don't talk to a lot of people. I'm very isolated. My agoraphobia and my disabilities and things. A lot of people have abandoned me. So I don't talk very often, so I don't know if I'm having these episodes. And I was looking into the stuttering and the slow speech and the slurred speech, and I saw these simple partials and epilepsy, and so I was looking into that, and I was thinking that that's what was going on with me. someone else mentioned that, if it's an allergic reaction, that, maybe it's the dye in the pills. So I started looking into that, and I stumbled across, the ingredients in the medication that's not listed. And I decided to put my medication in drugs.com. And I put my bladder medication in there, looking for any connections, because I knew it had to be the drugs. What I saw was that this medication that I had been taking for years was a combination of 5 different medications. Now, this pill bottle is just egregiously dangerous. All it says is phosphazel tablets. That's it. There's no milligrams. There's nothing on there. There's no warnings on the bottle, other than your usual ones. And I remember all the time, having this bottle of pills with me that I'm supposed to take 4 times a day for my bladder. And I would show them to the nurses and the doctors, and they'd go, "What is that? I've never heard of that before. Why doesn't it have any milligrams on it? What's going on with these pills? What are they?" And I would just say they're my bladder medication. I have interstitial cystitis. I have painful bladder syndrome, and I take them for the pain and my bladder flares, and I assumed they were like Azo that you get over the counter. And they would just shrug it off, and I'd put it back in my purse and stuff. And so it turns out that what looked like benign pills had 5 different medications in it. And one of them was called methylene blue. And I was like, what is methylene blue? And I'd also typed in my other medications that I was taking at the time. And I found 3 major drug interactions. I was shocked. 3 drugs that I have taken for at least a year, sometimes more, had a major drug interaction. And it listed something called serotonin syndrome. And I never heard of that in my life. And I do a lot of research. And with my medical transcription knowledge and everything. But I never heard of this. No one ever warned me of this. What is this? I clicked on it. It had just about every symptom that I had been experiencing. And I was like, my God, that's what's been wrong with me? I'd been given 3 medications that are dangerous and cause serotonin syndrome. What's serotonin syndrome? Basically, different medications increase serotonin, and you'd be surprised what types of medications cause serotonin syndrome. Mine were my Remeron, which was for my depression and my anxiety, My doctor also gave it to me because I lost 60 pounds last year. I lost my appetite. I was sick and I couldn't eat. So he put me on Remeron to stimulate my appetite. It was, supposed to be for depression and anxiety. So I've been taking it for a year. Over a year. And then apparently the ingredient in my phosphazel tablets, methylene blue, turns out to be an MAOI. Which again, I was shocked. I never knew that. I didn't even know what methylene blue was. I knew what an MAOI was. What's a psych medication doing in my bladder medication? Doesn't make any sense. Again, serotonin syndrome. Dangerous drug interaction. And the third one was my nausea medication that I had been taking on and off for, my God, at least a decade. Zofran. Again, dangerous drug interaction with both Remeron and phosphazel methylene blue. Any combination of these drugs will cause serotonin syndrome. So there's certain type of drugs called serotonergic drugs will increase your serotonin in your body. You can only have so much serotonin in your brain, and most of the serotonin is produced in your gut, believe it or not. Once this threshold is reached, you get serotonin toxicity, causing seizures, myoclonic jerking, spasms, speech problems, neurological and central nervous system problems. And I'm reading this stuff and I'm going, oh my God. They did this to me. How did this happen? How did they prescribe these drugs? And why did the pharmacy fill them over and over and over again? How did this happen? I found these interactions in less than a minute on drugs.com. You can't sit there and tell me that the pharmacy doesn't get warnings that I'm taking these pills that are major dangerous drug interactions, not moderate, causing serotonin syndrome. So I knew I had serotonin syndrome. I had serotonin levels that were toxic. The more research I did, the more it all started to come together. Everything started to fit. All the medical anomalies that I've had over the years, the ER visits with the same types of episodes, all of it fit. And it was caused by drug interactions. And there's a lot of them that cause serotonin to increase to the point of toxicity. And I was traumatized. I was re-victimized. I was upset. I was angry. I felt helpless. I immediately stopped the medications because that's what it says to do. So I just stopped my antidepressant. I stopped my nausea medication. I stopped my bladder medication. And it said that Valium or Ativan, which are both benzodiazepines, can help with the episodes. It binds with the serotonin and it helps. And I've been taking Valium and other benzos, depending on what prescription I've been given, for 5 to 6 years. Which in and of itself, I know now, is dangerous. But that was all I took at that point. I wouldn't take anything else. Nothing else. I wasn't going to touch any drugs. None of it. I didn't trust the drugs. I didn't trust the doctors. I didn't trust the hospitals. They did this to me. And every day there were new symptoms. My body would do weird things. It was terrifying. It was uncomfortable. It was painful. It was exhausting. I was so low functioning. But I was so desperate to lower the serotonin levels to a non-toxic level. And there's no test for serotonin syndrome. You can't test your levels of serotonin. So the odds of them believing you when I was having that severe of a reaction, so I went back and I put in the pills that they had given me the day before I went to the emergency room. And I found 2 more. And I went, no wonder I was in the ER. And serotonin syndrome, if the toxicity level gets high enough, you can go into a coma and you can die. But no, they were pseudo seizures. It was mental. Blame the victim. Blame the patient. It's never their fault. So I had to take matters into my own hands by stopping the medication and taking the Valium whenever I had an episode. And I had a lot of episodes, and I still do. It's been 3 weeks now. I started to go back and look at my drug history as far back as I could get it on the Rite Aid drug app. And I started seeing dangerous combinations of drugs causing serotonin syndrome. So many times. And the second time that I went to the ER, when I had serotonin syndrome toxicity, I was taking Wellbutrin, Celexa, possibly Zofran, I can't recall, Vicodin, and I was just given the Vicodin the day before I went to the ER. Once again, those drugs cause serotonin syndrome. They're a dangerous drug combination. So I took my 2 doses and I started itching with the first dose, and then I was itching even more. And then I just started feeling really funny. It just kept getting worse. And I thought it was just extreme stress. I just thought, my grandma had passed away and I was going through a lot of stuff. And that's what I thought. My body's just going crazy. That's what I've been told in the past. So by my second dose, within a few hours, I was in the kitchen and it hit me. It hit me so fast. And this time it was different. I still knew something was seriously wrong. I thought I was going into anaphylactic shock. And my body started to not want to work. And my legs started to just, it's like they don't have bones. And I was hardly dressed, and I had to call the ambulance. I was hardly dressed. So I stumbled into my bedroom, somehow managed to get dressed. Stumbled back into the living room. And as I'm talking to the ER operator, dispatch, my words are slurring. And I'm getting to the point where I sound like a stroke victim. I'm having a hard time moving my mouth, talking. It's like a power switch was hit. And my body just crumbled.